First story, SP50 Highways UFO Mystery, Brazil 2012. It was just another ordinary night on the road for me, or at least that's how it started. I've been driving trucks for over a decade now, and I thought I'd seen it all. The long, lonely stretches of highway, the weird stuff you sometimes spot in the middle of nowhere. I was used to it all. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on SP50 that night. I remember it was a cool, clear evening in May 2012. The stars were out, twinkling above the dark silhouettes of the trees lining the highway. I had just passed through a small town and was settling in for the long haul to my next drop-off point. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty and silent. It was late, probably around 1 a.m., and I was starting to feel that familiar heaviness in my eyelids. I reached for my thermos, hoping a swig of strong coffee would keep me alert. That's when I first noticed something odd in my peripheral vision. At first, I thought it was just the glare from an oncoming vehicle's headlights. But as I squinted and leaned forward over the steering wheel, I realized this light was different. It was too bright, too unnatural. The light seemed to appear out of nowhere, hovering just above the tree line ahead of me. It was intensely bright, almost painful to look at directly, but strangely, it didn't illuminate the surrounding area, like you'd expect such a powerful light source to do. And the weirdest part? There was no sound, absolutely none. You'd think something that bright would be making some kind of noise, right? But there was nothing, just this eerie silence that seemed to swallow up even the usual hum of my truck's engine. I started to slow down, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to just floor it and get the hell out of there, but curiosity, or maybe some kind of weird compulsion, made me ease off the gas instead. As my speed dropped, the light seemed to respond. It moved closer, growing larger in my windshield until it was all I could see. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body. I've never felt fear like that before. It was like every cell in my body was screaming at me to run, but I was frozen in place, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Just when I thought things couldn't get any freakier, my truck started to act up. The engine began to sputter and cough like it was running out of gas, even though I knew I had a full tank. The dashboard lights flickered, and then everything just died. 1 second I'm driving, the next I'm sitting in a dead truck in the middle of the highway, with this massive, silent light hovering right in front of me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even blink. It was like time itself had stopped. The light seemed to pulse, growing brighter and dimmer in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. I had this crazy thought that it was alive somehow, that it was looking at me, studying me. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed with fear. It could have been minutes or hours. All I know is that suddenly, without any warning, the light vanished. 1 second it was there, filling my entire field of vision, and the next, nothing. Just the dark highway stretching out ahead of me, as if nothing had happened. I sat there for a long time, trying to process what I'd just seen, trying to convince myself it had all been some kind of hallucination brought on by too many hours on the road. But deep down, I knew it was real. Something had happened to me out there on SP50, something I couldn't explain or understand. When I finally managed to shake off the paralysis that had gripped me, I fumbled for the ignition key with trembling hands. To my surprise, the truck started up immediately, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. The familiar rumble of the engine was almost comforting after the unnatural silence that had enveloped me moments before. I sat there for a while, engine idling, trying to gather my thoughts and calm my racing heart. That's when I noticed something that sent a fresh wave of fear through me, the time on my dashboard clock. It read 2:37 a.m. I distinctly remembered checking the time just before the light appeared, and it had been shortly after 1 a.m. How could over an hour and a half have passed? It felt like only minutes had gone by since I first spotted that strange light. With a growing sense of unease, I reached for the tachograph, the device that records my driving time and speed. What I saw there only deepened the mystery. According to the tachograph, my truck had been stationary for exactly 97 minutes. But that couldn't be right. I hadn't stopped driving, had I? I racked my brain, trying to account for that lost time, but came up blank. It was as if a chunk of my life had simply vanished. Feeling increasingly disoriented and scared, I decided I needed to get moving again. Sitting still on this dark, empty highway was only feeding my fear. I put the truck in gear and started driving, my eyes darting nervously between the road ahead and the rearview mirrors, half expecting to see that light reappear at any moment. As I drove, I became aware of other strange sensations. My skin felt oddly sensitive, almost tingly, as if I'd been sunburned. There was a metallic taste in my mouth that I couldn't shake, and a dull ache behind my eyes that hadn't been there before. I also noticed some weird marks on my arms, small circular bruises that I was sure hadn't been there earlier. They didn't hurt, but their perfect symmetry and positioning was unsettling. I tried to rationalize it all away. Maybe I'd dozed off at the wheel and had some kind of vivid dream. Maybe the bruises were from bumping into something earlier and I just hadn't noticed. But deep down, I knew these explanations didn't add up. Something had happened to me out there, something beyond my understanding. The rest of my drive that night was a blur of paranoia and confusion. Every set of headlights in the distance made me flinch. Every unexpected sound had me on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that whatever I'd encountered wasn't done with me yet. When I finally reached my destination and parked the truck, I was exhausted but too wired to sleep. I sat in the cab for a long time, debating whether I should tell anyone what had happened. Would they even believe me? I could barely believe it myself, and I'd lived through it. Eventually, I decided to keep it to myself, at least for the time being. I didn't want to risk my job or my reputation by telling a story that sounded like something out of a sci-fi movie. But keeping silent didn't make the experience any less real or terrifying. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself obsessively researching similar incidents, spending hours online reading about UFO sightings and alien abductions. Some of the stories I found chilled me to the bone, describing experiences eerily similar to mine. Lost time, strange lights, inexplicable physical effects. I began to wonder just how many others out there had gone through what I had, silently carrying the weight of an encounter they could neither explain nor forget. The incident on SP-50 changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. The most immediate and noticeable effect was my newfound fear of night driving. Something that had once been routine, even enjoyable, now filled me with dread. Every time the sun started to set, I'd feel my anxiety spike. The darkness that used to be comforting now seemed to hide untold terrors. I started making excuses to avoid overnight hauls, taking shorter routes, or pulling over at truck stops well before nightfall. My colleagues noticed the change, of course. They'd joke about me turning into a daytime driver, but I could see the confusion and concern in their eyes. How could I explain that every stretch of dark highway now held The potential for another encounter? That every bright light in the distance sent my heart racing? I couldn't, so I just laughed off their comments and kept my fears to myself. But the truth was, my whole perception of reality had been shaken to its core. The world I thought I knew, with its predictable laws of physics and nature, suddenly seemed like a thin veneer hiding something much stranger and more terrifying. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself grappling with an increasing sense of isolation. The experience had created a barrier between me and the rest of the world. I felt like I was carrying around this huge secret, this knowledge that the universe was far more complex and mysterious than most people realized. I'd catch myself staring at the sky during the day, wondering if they, whatever they were up there watching. At night, I'd lie awake in my bunk, replaying the events of that night over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. The lost time bothered me the most. What had happened during those 97 minutes? Had I been taken somewhere? Examined? The not knowing was almost worse than any scenario I could imagine. I started having vivid, unsettling dreams. In them, I'd find myself back on that highway, but this time the light would engulf me completely. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom sensation of weightlessness lingering for several minutes. These dreams felt different from normal nightmares, more vivid, more real. Sometimes I'd wake up with new, unexplained marks on my body, similar to the bruises I'd found after the initial incident. It made me question whether these were really just dreams, or if something else was happening to me while I slept. About 6 months after the encounter, I finally worked up the courage to see a doctor. I didn't tell him the whole story, of course, but I mentioned the anxiety, the sleep issues, and the unexplained marks. He ran some tests, did a physical exam, but found nothing out of the ordinary. He suggested stress and recommended I take some time off work. But how could I explain that work wasn't the problem? That the real issue was my fundamental understanding of reality had been shattered? In desperation, I turned to online forums and support groups for people who claimed to have had similar experiences. At first, it was a relief to find others who understood what I was going through. Their stories were eerily similar to mine: the lights, the lost time, the lingering physical and psychological effects. But as I delved deeper into these communities, I found myself growing more confused and frightened. Some members spoke of repeated abductions, of implants and alien human hybrids. Others claimed to have developed psychic abilities or received messages from extraterrestrial beings. I couldn't tell if these people were truly experiencing these things or if their initial encounters had driven them to paranoid delusions. And I couldn't shake the terrifying thought, was this my future? Would I too spiral down this rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre experiences and beliefs? As time went on, I found myself becoming hyper-aware of my surroundings, especially when I was on the road. Every unusual light in the sky, every unexplained sound, every moment of static on the radio became potential evidence of another encounter. I started keeping a detailed journal, noting down anything out of the ordinary. Looking back at those entries now, I can see how my paranoia was growing, how every little thing was being filtered through the lens of that night on SP-50. I'd find myself pulling over to investigate strange formations in fields, convinced they were crop circles. I'd study the faces of people I met, wondering if they were really human, or if they might be aliens in disguise. It sounds crazy now, but at the time, it felt entirely rational. The world had become a place of hidden meanings and secret truths, and I was desperate to uncover them. This obsession began to take a toll on my work and my relationships. I'd show up to jobs late because I'd spent hours the night before stargazing, waiting for another sign. I'd bore my friends with endless theories about government cover-ups and alien civilizations. Most of them started to distance themselves, probably thinking I'd lost my mind. And maybe I had, a little bit. But how could I go back to living a normal life when I knew that there was so much more out there than most people ever realized? About a year after the incident, something happened that shook me to my core. I was driving a familiar route, not far from where I'd had my original encounter. It was daytime, thankfully, but as I rounded a bend in the road, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in a field, just off the highway, was a perfect circle of flattened crops. My hands started shaking so badly I had to pull over. I sat there for a long time, staring at that circle, my mind racing. Was this proof that they were still here, still watching? Or was it just a coincidence, a natural phenomenon that I was reading too much into? Part of me wanted to get out and investigate, to look for any signs that might confirm what I'd experienced. But a larger part was terrified of what I might find. In the end, I didn't get out of the truck. I just sat there, heart pounding, until another vehicle approached and I felt compelled to drive on. As I pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just missed something important, that I'd let fear hold me back from uncovering the truth. But what if the truth was something I couldn't handle? What if knowing more would only drag me deeper into this nightmare? These questions haunted me for weeks afterward, adding to the growing weight of uncertainty and fear that I'd been carrying since that night on SP-50. The incident with the crop circle marked a turning point for me. I realized that I couldn't go on like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows, seeing aliens and conspiracies everywhere I looked. It was destroying my life, my career, my relationships. I needed to find a way to cope, to integrate what had happened to me into my life without letting it consume me. I started seeing a therapist, someone who specialized in trauma and PTSD. I didn't tell her the whole truth at first. I was still afraid of being labeled as crazy. Instead, I talked about anxiety, about feeling like my life was out of control. Gradually, as I began to trust her, I opened up more about what I'd experienced. To my surprise, she didn't immediately dismiss my story or try to convince me it wasn't real. Instead, she helped me focus on managing my fear and anxiety, on reclaiming my life from the grip of that one inexplicable night. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments when I'd be convinced I was being watched or followed. But slowly, I started to feel more grounded. I began to separate what I knew had happened, the light, the lost time, the physical symptoms, from the wild speculations and theories I'd built up around it. I couldn't explain what I'd experienced, but I could choose how to live with that uncertainty. As I worked on rebuilding my life and managing my fears, I made a conscious decision to start driving at night again. It was terrifying at first. Every shadow on the road seemed to hold potential danger, and I found myself constantly scanning the sky for any sign of unusual lights. But with each uneventful night drive, I felt a little bit stronger, a little more in control. I developed coping mechanisms, playing loud music, calling friends to chat, anything to keep my mind occupied and grounded in reality. Gradually, the paralyzing fear began to subside, replaced by a wary acceptance. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose not to let it define my entire existence. This newfound resilience was put to the test about 2 years after my initial encounter. I was driving a long-haul route that took me back onto SP50. As I approached the stretch of highway where it had all happened, I felt my heart rate spike and my palms start to sweat. But I kept driving, determined to face my fears head-on. As I passed the spot where I'd seen the light, I held my breath, half expecting something to happen. But nothing did. The road remained dark and empty, just like any other night. I let out a shaky laugh, feeling a mix of relief and something else. Disappointment, maybe? A small part of me had hoped for, I don't know, some kind of confirmation or closure. Instead, I was left with the same questions I'd been grappling with for the past 2 years. In the years since that night on SP50, I've come to a sort of uneasy truce with my experience. I can't explain what happened to me, and I've mostly stopped trying. The incident remains a mystery, a question mark in the middle of my life story. But I've learned to live with that uncertainty. I still have moments of fear, especially when I'm driving alone at night. I still find myself looking up at the stars and wondering what's really out there. But these thoughts no longer consume me the way they once did. I've reconnected with old friends, made new ones. I've even shared my story with a few people I trust. Some believe me, some don't. But I've found that just talking about it openly has helped lessen its power over me. I've also discovered that I'm not alone in having experienced something inexplicable. Through support groups and online communities, I've met others who've had similar encounters. We don't always agree on what these experiences mean, but there's comfort in knowing that I'm not the only one grappling with these questions. Some of the people I've met have become close friends, united by our shared brush with the unknown. We support each other, help each other stay grounded when the memories and fears threaten to overwhelm us. Today, as I write this, it's been exactly 10 years since that night on SP50. A decade of questions, fears, doubts, and gradual healing. I still don't know what happened to me during those lost 97 minutes. I don't know if what I encountered was extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or something else entirely beyond my comprehension, but I've made peace with not knowing. The experience changed me, there's no doubt about that. It opened my eyes to possibilities I'd never considered before, made me question everything I thought I knew about reality. But it also taught me about resilience, about the human capacity to face the unknown and keep going. I still drive trucks for a living, still spend long nights on lonely highways. And yes, sometimes I still find myself searching the sky for that strange, silent light. But now, when I look up at the stars, I feel more wonder than fear. Whatever's out there, whatever happened to me that night, it's part of a universe far more vast and mysterious than I ever imagined. And somehow, knowing that makes me feel not small and insignificant, but part of something incredibly vast and amazing. I don't know if I'll ever have answers to what happened that night, but I do know this. That experience on SP50 may have initially broken me, but putting myself back together has made me stronger than I ever thought possible. And if they ever do come back, well, I'll be ready. Not with fear, but with an open mind and a determination to understand. Because at the end of the day, that's all any of us can do when faced with the truly inexplicable. Stay curious, stay open, and keep moving forward, no matter what strange lights may appear on the road ahead. Second story, the Highway 10 abduction, Arizona, 2015. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but I can't keep it bottled up anymore. It's been eating away at me for years, and I need to get it off my chest. My name's Jack, and I'm a long-haul trucker. I've been driving across the country for over 2 decades now, and I thought I'd seen it all. But what happened to me on that night in 2015 on Highway 10 in Arizona, it shook me to my core, and I still can't make sense of it. I remember every detail like it was yesterday. The endless stretch of desert highway, the starry sky above, the hum of my truck's engine. It was just another routine drive. Or so I thought. I'd been on the road for about 6 hours, making good time. The radio was playing some old country tunes, and I was sipping on my 3rd cup of coffee, trying to stay alert. It was around 2 a.m., and there wasn't another vehicle in sight. Just me, my rig, and the vast, empty desert. That's when things started to get weird. At first I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. You know how it can get after hours of staring at the same stretch of road. But then I saw it clear as day. A bright light in the sky, way brighter than any star or plane I'd ever seen. At first it was just a pinprick, but it grew larger by the second. I remember thinking, what the hell is that? As it got closer and closer, it was moving way too fast to be a plane or helicopter. My heart started racing, and I felt this cold sweat break out all over my body. I tried to rationalize it, tell myself it was just some kind of military aircraft or something. But deep down, I knew this was different. As the light got closer, it started to take on a shape. It was round, like a disc, and it had this weird shimmer to it, like it was made of metal but also somehow not solid. And the light, it wasn't coming from headlights or anything I could recognize. It seemed to be emanating from the entire object, pulsing and changing colors in a way that made my eyes hurt to look at it. That's when things really went sideways. My truck, which had been running smooth as butter all night, suddenly started sputtering and coughing like it was gonna die. The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree, warning lights flashing everywhere. I tried to radio for help, but all I got was static. My phone, dead as a doornail. I was alone out there with this thing bearing down on me. I started to panic, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I couldn't look away from that light, even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run. As the object got closer, I could feel this intense pressure in my head, like someone was squeezing my brain. And then I heard it. This low, pulsing hum that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. It started soft, but quickly grew louder until it was all I could hear. My ears felt like they were gonna burst. And then, just like that, everything went still. The truck's engine cut out completely, and I rolled to a stop right there in the middle of the highway. I couldn't move a muscle. It was like my whole body had been turned to stone. All I could do was sit there, frozen, as that impossible object hovered directly over my truck. The silence was deafening. One moment, there had been the familiar rumble of my truck's engine and the hum of tires on asphalt. Now, there was nothing but that eerie, pulsating sound coming from above. I couldn't even hear my own ragged breathing, though I could feel my chest heaving with each panicked inhale. My eyes were locked on the object above me, unable to look away no matter how much I wanted to. It was massive, easily dwarfing my 18-wheeler. The surface seemed to shift and ripple like it was made of liquid metal. Lights danced across its hull in patterns that made no sense, hurting my eyes and making me feel dizzy. I wanted to close my eyes, to look away, but I couldn't. It was like my eyelids were pinned open, forced to take in every impossible detail. of the thing hovering above me. That's when I felt it. A presence. I can't explain it any other way. It was like suddenly becoming aware that you're not alone in a room you thought was empty. But this was so much more intense, so alien that it made my skin crawl. I felt observed, studied, like a bug under a microscope. Waves of cold dread washed over me as I realized that whatever was up there, it was aware of me. And it was interested. The pressure in my head intensified, and I had the distinct sensation of something probing at my mind. Memories started flashing before my eyes. Childhood moments, my first day as a trucker, conversations with loved ones, all jumbled together in a chaotic stream. I wanted to scream, to fight against this invasion, but I was utterly powerless. My body remained frozen, in place, a prisoner in my own skin. I don't know how long I sat there, trapped in that moment of terror. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to lose all meaning under the gaze of that thing. But then, as suddenly as it had appeared, everything changed. The pressure in my head vanished, and the light from the object intensified to an almost blinding degree. I squeezed my eyes shut, unable to bear it any longer. There was a sound like a thunderclap, so loud I thought my eardrums would burst. And then, nothing. The oppressive silence was replaced by the familiar sounds of the desert night. Crickets, chirping, a distant coyote's howl. I slowly opened my eyes, half expecting to see that impossible craft still looming above me, but the sky was empty, just stars twinkling innocently as if nothing had happened. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I fumbled for the key, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The engine turned over on the first try, as if it had never stalled at all. I flicked on every light I had, illuminating the empty highway around me. There was no sign of anything unusual, no scorch marks on the road, no strange debris. Nothing to prove that what I'd just experienced was real. It took me a few minutes to gather myself enough to start driving again. My whole body was trembling, and I felt nauseous, like I'd just stepped off a wild carnival ride. I kept glancing at the sky, half expecting that thing to reappear. But there was nothing up there except stars and the faint glow of the approaching dawn. I checked my phone, and to my surprise, it was working again. That's when I noticed the time and felt my blood run cold. According to my phone, over an hour had passed since I first saw that light in the sky. An hour I couldn't account for. I frantically checked my truck's logbook and GPS system, hoping they'd contradict what my phone was telling me, but they both confirmed it. Somehow I'd lost over an hour of time. As I continued down the highway, my mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I fallen asleep at the wheel? But no, I'd never felt more awake in my life. And the vivid details of what I'd seen, they were too real, too visceral to be a dream. I tried to recall what had happened during that missing hour, but it was like hitting a wall in my mind. There was just nothing. A blank space where memories should be. And that terrified me more than anything else. What had happened during that time? What had that thing done to me? I found myself checking my body for marks or injuries, but there was nothing visible. Just the lingering sensation of wrongness, like my skin didn't quite fit right anymore. I drove non-stop until I reached the next truck stop, my knuckles white, on the steering wheel the whole time. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even though the sky remained clear and empty. When I finally pulled into the truck stop, I practically fell out of my cab, my legs weak and shaky. I must have looked a mess because the girl at the counter asked if I was okay. I mumbled something about not feeling well and made a beeline for the bathroom. Locking myself in a stall, I finally allowed myself to break down. I sat there, my head in my hands, trying to muffle the sound of my sobs. I was a grown man, a tough old trucker who'd seen his share of weird shit on the road. But this was something else entirely. It shook me to my core, made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. As I sat there, trying to pull myself together, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had fundamentally changed. That I could never go back to the person I was before that night on Highway 10. After what felt like hours, I managed to compose myself enough to leave the bathroom. I splashed some cold water on my face, trying to erase the evidence of my breakdown. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize the man staring back at me. My eyes were bloodshot, with dark circles underneath that made me look like I hadn't slept in days. But it was more than that. There was a haunted look in my eyes that I'd never seen before. A kind of bone-deep weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. I knew I couldn't just brush this off and keep driving like nothing had happened. I needed to talk to someone, to try and make sense of what I'd experienced. But who would believe me? Who could I possibly turn to with a story like this? I ended up calling my dispatcher and telling them I was sick, that I needed to take a few days off. They weren't happy about it, but I didn't care. I couldn't focus on work, not with the weight of what had happened bearing down on me. I found a cheap motel nearby and holed up there, trying to piece together the fragments of that night. I scoured the internet for any reports of strange lights or UFO sightings in the area, but came up empty. It was like it had never happened. Like I was the only person in the world who had seen that impossible craft. The isolation of it all was almost worse than the experience itself. I felt like I was going crazy, questioning my own memories and sanity. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pulsing light, felt that alien presence probing at my mind. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by long nights of staring at the ceiling, jumping at every shadow and sound. As the days passed, I found myself becoming obsessed with trying to recover those missing memories. I read everything I could find about alien abductions and lost time experiences. Some of it resonated with what I'd been through, but a lot of it seemed far-fetched, even compared to what I'd experienced. I tried meditation, hypnosis, even considered seeing a therapist specializing in recovered memories. But nothing worked. That hour remained a complete blank, a void in my mind that I couldn't penetrate no matter how hard I tried, and the more I focused on it, the more it seemed to eat away at me. I started having vivid nightmares, waking up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. In my dreams, I was back on that highway, but this time I could see inside the craft. The images were blurry, indistinct, but they filled me with a terror so profound I'd wake up screaming, what had I seen? What had they done to me? The questions haunted me, day and night, driving me to the brink of madness. Weeks turned into months, and I found it increasingly difficult to return to my normal life. I tried going back to work, but every time I got behind the wheel of my truck, I'd break out in a cold sweat. The open road, once my home and sanctuary, now felt like a trap. Every distant light in the sky made my heart race, and I'd find myself gripping the steering wheel so tight my hands would ache for hours afterward. My co-workers noticed the change in me. I'd gone from a jovial, easygoing guy to someone who jumped at shadows and barely spoke. They tried to ask what was wrong, but how could I explain? How could I tell them that every night I relived the terror of that encounter? That I was afraid to close my eyes, terrified that I'd wake up and find another chunk of my life missing. The worst part was the lingering sensation that it wasn't over. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, monitored somehow. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. Other times, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, every hair on my body standing on end, with the absolute certainty that something was in the room with me. But of course, there never was. At least, nothing I could see. I started to wonder if maybe they'd done something to me during that missing hour, implanted something perhaps to keep tabs on me. I knew how paranoid that sounded, but after what I'd seen, could I really rule anything out? I found myself examining my body obsessively, looking for any sign of tampering, any evidence of what had been done to me, but my skin remained unmarked, betraying nothing of the turmoil within. It's been years now since that night on Highway 10, and I still don't have any answers. I've tried to move on, to put it behind me, but it's always there, lurking in the back of my mind. I left trucking eventually. I couldn't handle the long, lonely nights on the road anymore. Now I work a desk job, surrounded by the comforting bustle of other people. But even here, in the heart of the city, I don't feel safe. Not really. Because I know now that there are things out there beyond our understanding, beyond what we're prepared to accept as real. And once you've seen behind that curtain, there's no going back. I still look up at the night sky sometimes, searching for that impossible light. Part of me hopes to see it again, to prove to myself once and for all that I'm not crazy, but a bigger part of me prays that I never will. Because if they came back, if they took me again, I'm not sure I'd survive it this time. So I live with this knowledge, this burden, and I wonder how many others out there are like me, silent, witnesses to things that shouldn't exist, carrying the weight of experiences too incredible to share. If you're out there, if you've seen what I've seen, know that you're not alone. And maybe, someday, we'll find the answers we're looking for. But until then, we wait and we watch the skies, forever changed by what we've witnessed. Third story, The Night Highway. 15 vanished, Brazil, 2014. It was just another night on Highway 15, or at least that's what I thought when I first got behind the wheel of my trusty old truck. The clock on my dashboard read 11:32 p.m. as I pulled out of the truck stop, my thermos full of strong coffee and my mind set on making good time through the quiet stretches of Minas Gerais. The road ahead was dark, winding through the countryside like a black ribbon under a moonless sky. I'd driven this route hundreds of times before, knew every curve and pothole like the back of my hand. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to experience. As I settled into the rhythmic hum of the engine and the hypnotic white lines zipping past, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't the usual restlessness that comes with long hauls, or even the jitters from too much caffeine. No, this was something different, like a primal instinct telling me to turn back, to flee. But I pushed it down, chalking it up to too many late-night horror stories shared at pit stops. If only I had listened to that gut feeling, maybe I could have avoided the terror that was about to unfold. The first sign that something was off came about an hour into my drive. I was cruising along, the only vehicle for miles, when I noticed a strange light in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just another truck coming up behind me, its high beams cutting through the darkness. But as I watched, I realized this light was different. It was too bright, too white, and it seemed to be moving in a way that defied the laws of physics. One moment it was directly behind me. The next it was off to the side. Then above my truck. My heart started racing as I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a reflection, a trick of the light on my tired eyes. But deep down I knew this was something I couldn't explain away. The light grew brighter, so intense that it filled my cab, casting eerie shadows that danced across my dashboard. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. That's when things went from unsettling to downright terrifying. Without warning, my truck began to sputter and shake. The engine, which had been purring smoothly just moments before, now sounded like it was choking on its own fumes. Panic set in as I realized I was losing power, the speedometer needle dropping rapidly. I wrenched frantically at the gear stick, trying to coax some life back into my vehicle, but it was like trying to wake the dead. As the truck slowed to a crawl, that's when I felt it, a presence so overwhelming, so alien, that it froze the very breath in my lungs. It was as if the air itself had become thick, pressing down on me from all sides. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. My body was no longer my own, held in place by some invisible force that defied comprehension. Through the windshield I saw it, a massive object hovering just above the road, its metallic surface gleaming with an otherworldly sheen. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. No plane or helicopter could move like that, suspend itself so effortlessly in midair. As I sat there, paralyzed with fear, I felt a pressure building in my head, a high-pitched whine that seemed to bypass my ears and drill directly into my brain. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was a blinding flash of light and the sensation of being lifted, as if gravity itself had decided to let go of me. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, I was slumped over the steering wheel, my head pounding like I'd been on a 3-day bender. The first thing I noticed was the silence. That oppressive, unnatural quiet that seems to swallow up even the sound of your own breathing. My truck was dead, not even the faintest hum from the engine. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. The screen flickered to life, casting a ghostly blue glow over my sweat-soaked face. 3:47 a.m. That couldn't be right. I'd left the truck stop just after 11:30 p.m., and I couldn't have been driving for more than an hour before... Before what? My mind reeled as I tried to piece together what had happened, but it was like trying to grasp at smoke. There were fragments, flashes of memory that didn't make sense, strange lights, a feeling of weightlessness, and faces that weren't human. But every time I tried to focus on these images, they slipped away, leaving me with nothing but a gnawing sense of dread. Forcing myself to focus, I took stock of my surroundings. I was still on Highway 15, but something was off. The landscape looked different, alien almost. The familiar rolling hills and scattered trees had been replaced by a barren, almost lunar landscape. Rocks and scrub brush dotted the terrain, but they looked wrong somehow, as if they'd been placed there by some unseen hand. Even the air felt different, thicker and charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs weak and unsteady beneath me. The moment my feet hit the ground, a wave of nausea washed over me. I doubled over, retching violently, but nothing came up. As I straightened, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the dusty ground beside my truck, was a perfect circle of scorched earth. The grass and weeds within it had been burned away, leaving nothing but blackened soil. And at the center of this circle was a set of marks, 3 indentations, forming a triangle, each as wide as my outstretched hand. My mind raced, trying to come up with some rational explanation for what I was seeing. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at the wheel, driven off the road, and hallucinated the whole thing. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The evidence was right there in front of me, undeniable and terrifying. I forced myself to approach the circle, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. As I got closer, I noticed something else, a faint metallic smell hanging in the air like ozone mixed with something I couldn't quite identify. It made my nose burn and my eyes water. I knelt down, running my fingers over one of the indentations. The soil was still warm to the touch, and as I pulled my hand away, I noticed something stuck to my fingertips. It was a fine, silvery powder that seemed to shimmer and move of its own accord. I tried to brush it off, but it clung to my skin, burrowing into my pores. Panic gripped me as I frantically wiped my hand on my jeans, but the powder wouldn't come off. That's when I heard it. A low, pulsing hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing but empty road and that eerie, transformed landscape stretching out in all directions. The hum grew louder, vibrating through my bones and making my teeth ache. I stumbled back to my truck, desperate to get away, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever had happened here. But as I reached for the door handle, I froze. There, reflected in the window, was something that turned my blood to ice. My face looked wrong. My eyes were too large, too dark, and there was a strange silvery sheen to my skin. I blinked hard, convinced I was seeing things, but when I looked again, the image remained. I raised a trembling hand to my cheek, half expecting to feel cold, alien flesh. Instead, I felt the rough stubble of my usual 5 o'clock shadow, but the reflection showed smooth, almost metallic skin. I let out a strangled cry, stumbling backward and nearly falling. What had they done to me? Who were they? The questions swirled in my mind, each more terrifying than the last. I couldn't stay here, couldn't risk whatever had happened to me happening again. With shaking hands, I wrenched open the truck door and hauled myself inside. The key was still in the ignition, and I turned it with a silent prayer. To my immense relief, the engine roared to life, shattering the unnatural silence. I didn't wait to see if anything was coming after me. I slammed the truck into gear and floored it, tires spinning on the dusty road before finally finding purchase. As I sped away, I couldn't resist one last glance in the rearview mirror. What I saw nearly caused me to drive off the road. The circle of scorched earth was glowing, pulsing with an eerie blue light that seemed to reach up into the sky like a beacon. And there, hovering just above it, was a shape. It was massive, easily the size of a house, but it shimmered and shifted as if it wasn't fully there. One moment, it looked like a classic flying saucer. The next, it was a swirling mass of impossible angles and dimensions. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving nothing but empty sky, and the lingering afterimage burned into my retinas. I pressed the accelerator harder, willing the truck to go faster, to outrun whatever nightmare I'd stumbled into. As I drove, the landscape slowly began to return to normal. The alien terrain gave way to familiar rolling hills and scattered trees. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was following me just beyond the reach of my headlights. Every shadow seemed to move. Every reflective surface held the potential for that terrifying, altered reflection of myself. I drove for hours, not daring to stop, not even when my fuel gauge dipped dangerously low. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon when I finally saw signs of civilization. A small gas station on the outskirts of a town I didn't recognize. I pulled in, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. As I sat there trying to gather the courage to step out of the truck, I caught sight of myself in the rearview mirror. My face was normal again, lined with exhaustion and fear, but undeniably human. The relief was so intense I nearly wept. But then I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. There, just behind my ear, was a small silvery mark. It was perfectly circular, about the size of a dime, and seemed to shimmer slightly in the early morning light. I touched it gently, wincing at the tender, almost burning sensation that radiated from it. What was it? A brand? An implant? The questions threatened to overwhelm me, but I pushed them aside. I needed fuel, needed to get home, needed to try and make sense of what had happened to me. As I stumbled out of my truck, the world seemed to tilt and spin around me. The simple act of walking to the gas station door felt like navigating an obstacle course. My legs were wobbly, and every step sent waves of nausea through my body. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, startling me so badly I nearly fell. The clerk behind the counter looked up, his eyes widening as he took in my disheveled appearance. "You all right, buddy?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. How could I possibly explain what had happened? Would anyone even believe me? I managed to croak out a request for fuel and shuffled to the bathroom, desperate to splash some water on my face, and tried to pull myself together. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the harsh glare making me wince. As I leaned over the sink, I caught sight of my reflection in the grimy mirror. For a split second, I saw it again, that alien version of myself, with two large eyes and metallic skin. I blinked hard, and my normal face returned, but the image was seared into my mind. The mark behind my ear seemed to throb, a constant reminder that what I'd experienced was real, no matter how much I wanted to deny it. Back outside, I mechanically went through the motions of fueling up my truck. The normalcy of the act felt surreal after the night I'd had. As I watched the numbers on the pump tick upward, a memory suddenly flashed through my mind, being strapped to a cold metal table, surrounded by blinding lights and looming figures. The sensation was so vivid, so terrifying that I dropped the fuel nozzle, gasoline splashing onto my boots. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The clerk must have seen me through the window because he came running out asking if I was okay. I couldn't answer him. My eyes were darting everywhere, searching for signs of what? Aliens? UFOs? My own sanity slipping away? The concerned clerk helped me sit down on the curb, pressing a bottle of water into my trembling hands. As I sipped the lukewarm liquid, I tried to focus on the present moment, on the rough concrete beneath me and the gradually lightening sky. But the memory of that table, of those figures, lingered at the edges of my consciousness, threatening to pull me back into the nightmare. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I managed to pull myself together enough to finish fueling up and get back on the road. As I drove, I tried to piece together what had happened. The strange lights, the lost time, the inexplicable changes to the landscape. It all pointed to one conclusion, as impossible as it seemed. I'd been abducted by aliens. The thought was so absurd, so at odds with everything I'd ever believed, that I almost laughed out loud. But the laughter caught in my throat as I remembered the terror I'd felt, the strange mark behind my ear, the lingering sense that I wasn't quite the same person I'd been when I started my drive the night before. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to contact someone, anyone who might be able to help me make sense of what had happened. But as I scrolled through my contacts, I realized I had no idea who to call. Who would believe me? Who wouldn't think I'd lost my mind? The isolation I felt in that moment was overwhelming. I was alone with this experience, alone with the fear and confusion that threatened to consume me. As the miles ticked by, I made a decision. I couldn't tell anyone about this, not yet. I needed time to process, to try and understand what had happened to me. But one thing was certain. I would never look at the night sky the same way again. Every star, every distant light now held the potential for terror. And as I drove on, heading towards home but feeling further from it than ever before, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Whatever had happened to me on Highway T-15, whatever had taken me and changed me, might come back. And next time, I might not be lucky enough to return. The following days were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. I called in sick to work, unable to face the thought of getting back behind the wheel of my truck. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of that night. The blinding lights, the alien landscape, the terrifying reflection of my altered self. The mark behind my ear became an obsession. I spent hours examining it in the mirror, convinced it was growing larger, changing shape, or emitting some kind of signal. I covered it with bandages, but I could still feel it there. A constant reminder of what I'd experienced. I scoured the internet for information on alien abductions, reading countless accounts from people who claimed to have gone through similar ordeals. Some of their stories resonated with me, sending chills down my spine as I recognized elements of my own experience. But others seemed far-fetched, even to my newly expanded sense of reality. I found myself questioning everything: my memories, my sanity, the very nature of the world I thought I knew. The line between what was real and what was paranoid delusion began to blur, and I felt myself slipping further into a dark pit of fear and uncertainty. About a week after the incident, I finally worked up the courage to return to Highway 15. I told myself I was looking for evidence, something tangible to prove that what had happened to me was real. But deep down, I think I was hoping to find nothing, to be able to dismiss the whole thing as a vivid nightmare or stress-induced hallucination. I arrived at the spot where I believed my encounter had taken place just as the sun was setting. The familiar landscape looked benign in the fading light, nothing like the alien terrain I remembered. I got out of my car, my legs shaky as I walked to the side of the road. At first, I saw nothing out of the ordinary, just scrub brush and dusty soil. But then, as I was about to give up and head back, something caught my eye. There, partially, hidden by a clump of weeds, was a perfect circle of scorched earth. My heart began to race as I approached it, my mind flooding with memories of that terrifying night. The circle was smaller than I remembered, about the size of a car tire, but unmistakably there, and at its center, barely visible in the fading light, were 3 indentations forming a triangle. I fell to my knees, my fingers tracing the marks in the soil. They were real. It had all been real. As I knelt there, struggling to process what I was seeing, a sound cut through the evening air. A low, pulsing hum that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. It was the same sound I'd heard that night, the sound that had preceded my abduction. Panic gripped me as I scrambled to my feet, my eyes frantically scanning the darkening sky. There, just above the horizon, was a light. It pulsed and shifted, growing brighter with each passing second. I stood frozen, torn between terror and a bizarre sense of anticipation. Part of me wanted to run, to flee back to my car and never look back. But another part, a part I didn't fully understand, felt drawn to that light. As it grew closer, I felt the familiar sensation of paralysis setting in. The world around me began to fade, the details of the landscape blurring and shifting. The last thing I remember is a blinding flash of light and the feeling of being lifted off my feet. And then, nothing. I woke up in my own bed the next morning, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. The circle of scorched earth, the strange light, the paralyzing fear, it all felt like a dream. But as I sat up, my head pounding and my body aching, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. There on my nightstand was a small metallic object I'd never seen before. It was triangular in shape, with strange symbols etched into its surface. And as I reached out to touch it, it began to glow with an otherworldly light. Whatever had happened to me on Highway 15, whatever strange and terrifying journey I'd been taken on, I knew with absolute certainty that it wasn't over. In fact, I had a sinking feeling that it was only just beginning.